Hey guys, so today you're going to work through learning how to do a couple different types of watercolor value scales and blending things. These are very basic, but they're also kind of the foundational building blocks of what you need to do. So first, we're going to talk about a tint. And if you remember from previous lessons that you've had on color theory, a tint is anytime you add white to a color, but with watercolor, we don't have white in our palette, if you notice above. So we have to use water and the white of our paper as our white. So a tint is when you add white or when the color, the hue itself gets lighter. We're going to then jump into a shade, which is when you add black. And then we're going to walk through a color transition from yellow to red, just so you can see some of those blending techniques. So like I said, first, we're going to start with our tint. So since it's going from white to the pure color, we will start with just the white of the paper. You will use the tray that's attached to your watercolor palette as your blending palette. Make sure that you don't have any like shiny parts of your paint. That will make it really, really sticky. As you work through it and as it dries, it'll just not look correctly. So you'll work through blending stuff in your palette. So we're going to start with the first little section of this as white, and I'm going to leave that completely untouched so we can transition to red. I'm going to add just a little bit of red to water in my palette and then begin on that second rectangle. Sometimes it's a good idea to start with the wet on wet technique because that just helps you lay in a nice even color. You can try wet on dry as well if you want. The main idea of this is just to get that good color down. As you fill it in, try to make it nice and even. See how it's barely showing any red. It's just a really, really light wash, a light tint of red. As we move into the next one, what I like to do is just add a little bit more color each time to that water that I have in my mixing tray. And you'll see that it's around the same tint right there. And so you have to kind of mix it and add a little bit more red into it as you go along. As you see, it's just kind of like a step up in that tint. And then as we move along, we're going to just keep adding a little bit more red, a little bit more red on each rectangle. So you'll have just a little bit darker tint each time you move through. As we get to that last rectangle, we are going to have pretty much a nice, even, solid primary red hue. Now it's watercolor, so you'll see that it is a little opaque, and that's okay. That's what we want. This is not meant to look like acrylic paint. This is not meant to be a super thick color, so don't worry about that. Just get that really nice, true hue of the red. So hue is just another word for the color. All right, now that we finished that one, we're gonna move to a tint. A shade, sorry. We're going to move to a shade. We just did the tint. So a shade is when you add black to a color. Remember, black is like very, very strong. And if you add black like crazy, it's going to cause your color to get black very, very quickly. So similar to how we did the water and the red, we're going to do that with the black. So I like to put a little bit of red in my mixing tray. And then I like to slowly add some dots of black throughout. So the first rectangle on this one is going to be a true red, like our last one on our tint. And then I'm going to slowly add little dots of black as I move up that shade scale. So you'll notice as you move through it that it really doesn't take a ton of black. So you'll see that I'm having like a dot of it and I'm just adding it in very quickly, very small amounts, and that'll get that really good transition to the shade. Again, you can try doing it with the wet on wet. Sometimes that helps blending it evenly. Just try a couple different things, see what works for you. See how that's just slightly more muted, slightly darker than the one that's on the left. That's what you're going for. You're not going to go for a crazy, crazy transition as you move up it. This is kind of like making something a little bit ombre, making the transitions subtle, but finding those nice balances between each section. As you can see, as we move up it, you will continue adding little dots of black to each one. So there is a gradual change. And you'll notice that makes it get more muted. It kind of starts looking more maroon, a little bit more black. These are really nice whenever you're mixing colors, if you want to get a little bit more moody colors or if you want things to not be as intense. So I'm going to zoom out because I want y'all to be able to see my mixing tray. So you'll see that I'm slowly adding more and more black as I move up the scale. As you get to that last one, you're going to want it to be a pretty true black, similar to how we had the true red above. Again, watercolor is going to be pretty opaque, so don't worry about it being super duper black like you took a Sharpie and drew on it. Once we finish that one, we're going to move on to our color transition, which we're going to go from yellow to red. If you remember about color mixing, yellow and red combined make orange. So you're going to see that kind of change throughout this whole color transition. This is the same technique that we worked through with the tint and the shade. You're going to take your first color, which will be the yellow, and then you're going to slowly add some red into it. So I like to start with the true yellow, pretty much straight from the palette, that primary yellow that we have. And then I'm going to just add like a dot of red each time I move up. So you'll see that there are the gradual transitions just like above. As you continue to work through that, once you get to that middle rectangle, so there's a total of 7 rectangles. When you get to that middle one, it should be a nice, pretty true orange. And then you'll see it starts leaning more towards the red as you get to that right side of the rectangle. Eventually, you're going to end up with that true red, just like you did on that top tint section. And then once you fill all those in, you are completely done with all 3 of those watercolor scales. So again, a tint is when you add white to a color, but with watercolor, it's when you add water. Shade is when you add black, and then we're going to talk through some color transitions. It's probably wise for you to really only use your primary colors, which are red, yellow, and blue, as well as black to create those shades. We're going to work through some mixing. I don't want to see any true colors straight from the palette on your final watercolor pieces, so use this as a time to get your mixing down. If you need to make more than one of these to kind of practice with a couple different color transitions or different colors with tints and shades, feel free to do that.